everybody, and welcome to the second part of a two-part lesson series on how to plan and write up your answer for the poetry question, and this is for a poem from Songs of Ourselves Volume 1. So let's just have a quick recap of what we did in part 1, and if you haven't watched part 1, I do advise you go back and watch part 1 before you watch this one, as you will miss all of the planning advice and guidance. So first of all, we looked at how to interpret, deconstruct the question, understand what our focus is. The focus then drives everything that you're going to do with regards to your plan. We looked at how to use the poem itself and how to analyse in time conditions. We annotated the poem for a range of methods and techniques, which you will already know by the time you get to your exam. So it's a good idea just to get all those out onto the paper so you don't miss any, you don't forget any. We then brainstormed ideas, decided on a thesis statement, and we made a plan. Like I said, if you haven't watched part 1, I do recommend you do so. I give you lots of tips and tricks on how to make sure that you can plan in the most efficient and effective way. A lot of it does happen on the poem itself, just to make sure that you're not writing too many notes and you're not spending too long writing down detailed notes for your plan. So this is what we had in part 1. So we had our fully annotated, highlighted copy of the poem. We also had our thesis statement, which is war causes widespread and irreversible destruction to both nature and humanity, highlighting the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of human conflict. A lot of that vocabulary, if you did have a look at part 1, you'll see a lot of that vocabulary comes from the poem overview that I did at the start. And then we have the 3 points that we want to make in response to the question. And again, these kind of satellite around the thesis statement. You can look at the thesis statement as your umbrella, and then your points come off the umbrella, and then off the umbrella points, we've then got our quotations and our analysis. So everything really works quite well together. So this is what we kind of ended with at the end of part 1. And then we also had this plan. Now remember, I said to you, I'm not suggesting that you rewrite everything out. This is just me pulling all of my notes and my points together so you can see exactly where my essay is going. So you can see I've got 3 points here. I've got between 2, 3. Here I've got 4 quotations. So I've got a range. I've kind of only got 4 here because Mortal Stain is by itself, and then these 3 form part of a list. So I wouldn't usually have 4 and go in a lot of detail on 4 because that'd be far too long. You'd probably spend the entirety of your time just focusing on one point. But you do want a range, and then you've just got all of the different notes that I'd already annotated with the poem with, and these will then be pulled straight into the essay. At this point, I would just like to remind you, please don't forget to check out my micro lessons. I've got a micro lesson series where I go through lots of different tips and tricks for literature writing, and specifically there's some that will help you with how to write your point, how to embed your quotation, and also how to analyse. So this is my suggested essay structure. Obviously, if you're working with on an essay structure with your teacher, then stick to whichever essay structure you think works for you. Or it may be that you have a general overview, or you have a mishmash of both of them. So you want to have, like, if we think about the essay structure as being like a 3-point structure, so you have your introduction, then you have your main body, and then you have your conclusion if you have time. And pupils always want to know, do we need to write a conclusion? Do we need to write a conclusion? If you've got time, yes, it's always a nice way to wrap up your essay. But if you don't spend too long thinking about your conclusion if it's to the detriment of the rest of your essay, particularly to the main body of your essay. So I've given you some questions to help you with regards to structuring your introduction and your conclusion. Your main body, this is what you will have seen on the plan. So section or point 1, so whatever you want to call them. It's probably not helpful to call them paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, just because mentally that's quite restricting. Then you think that you can only write 1 paragraph for your first point. And like I mentioned in part 1, it may be that you've got quite a lot to say and it spans 2 paragraphs, but it's still part of the same point. So I prefer to call them either sections or points. And then moving over here, the structure of each of your points. I'm not going to read this out, it'll take too long, but if you do just want to pause the video now and you can have a bit of a look through, and it just helps you to think about really what are the ingredients of each of your points, what should go in there, and it could act like a checklist for you. And if you kind of remember them, write it down quickly on your paper, and you can just tick it off as you go. And it just means that you are developing quite a detailed, analytical essay that covers all of the assessment objectives. And also, again, don't forget to check out Ms. Duckle's Classroom Micro Lessons, because I also do go through introduction and conclusion. I know that these can be quite tricky. These are the ones that I do get the most questions about. So if you are struggling with how to write really quite a quick, a concise introduction and conclusion, then do check out those micro lessons. Okay, so for the purpose of this video, obviously I don't want to make it too long, so we are just going to look at point 1. So I'm going to give you a model answer, and you can see exactly how I've built all of this together. I'm going to show you how I've put an introduction together, and then I'm going to show you how I've put the full point together, and you will be able to see how I've worded this point. Obviously this is like a fragment of a sentence, so I've worded the point, embedded my quotations, and then I've analysed them, so you'll be able to have a look at exactly how I've got from these notes to a full essay. Okay, so if we have a look at the introduction. Now, your introduction should be built around your thesis statement. So if you imagine your thesis statement is driving everything really, but also it's what's nestled in between all of the different ideas that you're going to have in your introduction. So there's quite a quick and easy formula that you can use to write a poetry introduction. So what's the poem about? What does the poet do? How does she or he do it, and why? And we're going to try to keep it to 3 sentences. Okay, sometimes it might span to 4, but otherwise the danger with an introduction is that it starts to step on all of the different points that you want to make. We definitely shouldn't have any quotations in an introduction. It should just give a very clear overview of what you're going to talk about in the essay, the direction of your essay, but also show that you do understand the poem itself. I've got some success criteria over here for you, just to make sure that you're mentioning. Obviously, we need to mention the poet's name and the poem, keyword from the question, your opinion, your idea, your viewpoint, and we want some verbs to show the poet's message, intention or purpose. And this also shows that you understand the tone of the poem as well. And I've got some verbs down here that could help you. So this is the introduction. In Lament, Clarke explores the devastating impact of war on the natural world. So you can see already we've got these keywords from the question. Through vivid imagery, structural techniques and carefully chosen language. The poem, written in response to the Gulf War. Now we've got a little bit of context here. As I said in part 1, please don't mention context if you're not sure how to use it and it's just a bolt-on. With regards to this, the context here does set the scene for the poem, so it can be included here. The poem written in response to the Gulf War. Critique, so look at the verb that we're using here. Humanity's disregard for nature. Highlighting the environmental destruction caused by conflict. So this is what the poem is about. Clarke effectively conveys, this is what the poet's doing. She effectively conveys the fragility of life in a polluted and war-torn world, urging readers to consider the consequences of human actions. So here we have quite a nice introduction. It's short, it's concise, but it really delivers everything that it needs to. Prepares the examiner for what they're about to read in the rest of your essay. And you'll notice that it is built around my thesis statement. A lot of the language here, a lot of the words, vocabulary from the thesis statement do appear here in the introduction. Okay, so let's have a look at the first point. Okay, so this is the first point. As you can already see, this is 2 paragraphs. And again, this really exemplifies why I said to you, it's really, really difficult to say, oh, I've got 3 paragraphs in my essay, because it's highly likely that you won't. So you can see that I've got 2 here, but I will show you how you can transition from one paragraph to the next to show that it's still part of the same point. And on the right here, you can see I've got a checklist. So the checklist is built around the mark scheme, the assessment objectives, and it's really everything that needs to be in a good essay. Obviously it will look quite colourful, and this is to help you understand where everything is. Sometimes there's a little bit of crossover. I'll explain that as we go. But you can see that we've got relevant points, consistent focus on the question, evidence that is introduced and embedded, techniques, so where we're naming the techniques and the methods, language choice, which is when we're zooming in and we're talking about words, so we're analysing them, and this again is useful if you want to double up. So you might want to talk about a metaphor, but then you might want to zoom in on a particular word within the metaphor, and then you're doing two things, you're doubling up on your analysis there. Then green is analysis and interpretation of language, poetic techniques. We've got effect on the reader, writer intention, and context. And as you can probably look at it and see what we've got the most of, we've got a lot of this green. And that really is because your analysis is going to build up everything. Your point is the driver. Your quotations are you proving that what you're saying is correct, but then your analysis is showing that you really understand how a poem works, and you really understand how the poet is conveying their message and why it's effective. And then I've got a few extras down here just to help you. These extras really help you with your AO4. So you've got connectives to show that you're building on your ideas. You've got linking phrases and transitions. This particularly helps you here when you're working between two paragraphs. And then you've got tentative phrases that help you with your interpretation. So we start here with our point, and you'll see that I built this point around the fragment of a point that I already had in my plan. Clarke presents destruction of war as a force that corrupts even the most life-giving environments. The imagery of pulsing burden, now note how I've embedded my quotation here. So I've named the method already. It doesn't matter if you name the technique before you embed it or after embed it, you can do both. And you will be able to see that I've done both. Conveys the vitality and fragility of the turtle's eggs. So here we've got our interpretation. So green is analysis and interpretation. Your interpretation is, what do you think that it does? What do you think that it means? And then we dive into some language analysis here, as the word pulsing suggests movement, energy, and the potential for new life. However, the word burden implies a heavy weight or responsibility. So note how we lead here with a connective, which indicates how we're going to discuss this. So the word however shows that actually maybe we're going to add something contrasting here. We've noticed something. The juxtaposition, so I've noticed another method here. So don't be afraid to mention multiple methods. So already I've got imagery, I've got juxtaposition, I'm about to talk about contrast. So wherever you see it, say it and analyse it. The juxtaposition highlighting the vulnerability of these eggs in a world that threatens their survival. So here again we go back to this focus on the question. Now you don't have to merely repeat the wording all the time. Impact of war, that would get really repetitive. But you can repeat it using different phrasing. So you're still relating back to the question, or it's implicit in there, you're just not using the same phrase over and over again. This contrast between vitality and vulnerability establishes the wide theme of life being endangered by human conflict. Again, I am going back to this idea of the impact of war on nature. The metaphor, so I've got another technique here, nest of sickness, reinforces this idea, contrasting the nurturing and protective associations of a nest with the contamination suggested by sickness. So look how I'm pulling all of this. I've talked about the metaphor, I've split it into two, I've thought about what those words mean, what the connotations of those words are, what it means, and I'm really analysing the language used here and the impact. And then I'm going to dive in even further on the word nest. The word nest traditionally symbolises safety, so again I'm commenting on method here, it's a symbol. New beginnings and growth, but here it has been corrupted, transforming it into a space of harm and decay. Furthermore, so I'm now going to add on to this analysis and this interpretation. Sickness connotes disease, impurity. So look how many times I'm talking about the connotations of these words. So always think to yourself, what do these words mean? What are the connotations of these words in the real world outside of the poem? And then you think, well, then how has the poet used those associations with that language? Connotes disease, impurity and decay. which reflects the devastating effects of pollution caused by war. Going back to the question here, turning a space meant for life into one of destruction and death. This is linked back to the question. It is also analysis and interpretation as well, but I couldn't make it both blue and green. Together, the metaphor vividly captures how war infiltrates and destroys even the most sacred and natural spaces. And then we move on to our second paragraph in point 1. So we want to somehow make this link and this transition. And the best way to do that is to take an idea you've just covered, take some language that you've just used and pull it into the second paragraph. This idea of the finality of war's destruction, so you can see that I've taken this just from the bottom of this paragraph, is further emphasised. So now I'm setting myself up to talk about something else. By the end stopped line at the conclusion of stanza 1. So here I've got the full quotation because I need this full stop at the end. The pause created by the full stop, so I've named my technique. I'm going to talk about end stopped, and you'll notice that I've tried to make sure I'm using a mixture here of language and structure. The pause created by the full stop forces the reader, so here we've got the effect on the reader, to dwell on the finality of the turtle's plight, reinforcing the sense that the damage inflicted by war is irreversible. The placement of this line at the stanza's conclusion, so again I'm talking about structure. So anytime you talk about where something is and why, that's also structure. Heightens its impact, leaving the reader with a stark image of innocence and life overwhelmed by contamination. Perhaps. So here is my tentative phrase. So we don't always know the answer. We don't know specifically why something is there, but we don't need to because it's a poem and we're supposed to make our interpretation. So this is where your tentative phrases really work here to help you develop your interpretations. Perhaps Clarke's aim, so we've also got writer intention here, is to warn us about the lasting consequences of war on future generations of both humans and animals, making the reader reflect, we've got effect on the reader again, on the ethical cost of conflict. By connecting the destruction of war to the corruption of spaces that symbolise life and renewal, Clarke effectively critiques, we've gone back to the writer intention, humanity's actions. Both in the past and today, we've got our link back to context here, and their devastating impact on the natural world. Now, what you'll notice is that with the context, it's very light touch in terms of what I've chosen to mention. And it may be that I would have chosen to exclude context altogether. So if you can pull context in and it adds to what you're saying and it develops your interpretation and your analysis, then by all means add it. There's no point just adding in a historical fact for no reason. Okay, so some final tips. Make clear points using the language from the question or synonyms from the question. Choose relevant and interesting evidence that you definitely know that you can comment on. Don't pick something that you think, well, I really like this quotation, and then you write it down, you commit to it, you put it in your essay, and you've got nothing to say about it. And this is why a plan is a really good idea. Make sure that you're naming and analysing techniques. Analyse language choice even if you've commented on a different method. If you've commented on structure, form, then you can also comment on language, and this is where we are layering our analysis. Always keep linking back to the poet's message and intention. This can be either explicit with their name or implicit. Link to the effect on the reader. Think about, what are we supposed to think, feel? Are we supposed to do something? Is it a call for action? Link to the context if it's relevant and it's appropriate to that particular point that you're making. Use academic phrases, tentative phrases, critical verbs to help you develop your response. And don't forget to check out the whole host of micro lessons that I have. I have a huge playlist on how to help you with a range of different literature skills, a lot of which have been covered today. So thank you very much for taking part in this lesson. I really hope that it's helped you with regards to some skills and a little bit of confidence with this part of your literature exam. Thank you very much. Goodbye.